Dear viewers, Assalamu alaikum. In this video, we will study electrolytes balance. In our previous video, we studied electrolytes and their important functions. So today we will discuss electrolytes balance, how these are regulated inside body, movement of electrolytes and non-electrolytes across cell membrane. We will study different ion channels and different type of transportations through these ion channels like active transport or passive transport. We will study different membrane transport proteins and different type of co-transporters. In the last session we will study membrane potential, active and resting membrane potential. So first of all, what are the ion channels? Ion channels are integrated or transmembrane proteins that are involved in transportation of different ions or small molecules across the cell membrane. There are different examples of ion channels like sodium ion channel, potassium ion channel, calcium ion channel, sodium calcium ion channel, chloride ion channel, sodium glucose ion channel, sodium potassium ATPase, pump, and aquaporins. So we will discuss all of these ion channels, but first we will study what are different types of transportations. There are two types of transportation. The one is active transport and the second one is the passive transport. So transportations, these type of transportation are important for the movement of molecules or electrolytes across the cell membrane. The active transport can be further divided into primary active transport and secondary active transport. So what is active transport? Active transport requires energy for transportation of the molecules. It occurs against the concentration gradient, that is, from lower to higher concentration. The second, passive transport, it doesn't require energy. It occurs along the concentration gradient, that is, from higher concentration to lower concentration. And the primary active transport requires ATP, so it is ATP dependent transport, whereas secondary active transport, it is ATP independent transport. So transportation occurs but ATP doesn't require. What are co-transporters? These are membrane transport proteins or ion channels. So we already discussed that ion channels are the integral membrane proteins that transport molecules or ions across the cell membrane. If we look at the different types of transporters, we will observe that there are co-transporters and uniporters. Uniporters are the transmembrane proteins that allow single ions across the cell membrane. That is also known as facilitated diffusion or passive transport. The examples are sodium ion channel, which are involved in facilitated diffusion or passive diffusion of sodium ions from higher to lower concentration, calcium ion channels, chloride ion channels. So these are the different examples of ion channels which are uniporter. Only single molecule passes from one side to other side. Whereas in case of co-transporters, there are further two types, symporters and antiporters. Symporters are those type of transmembrane proteins which allows two different molecules across the cell membrane, but both of these transported from one side to other side are both of these transported to the same side. Therefore, these are known as symporters. Like here, we have an example that A and B molecule both are outside of the membrane and these are transported to the inside of the membrane. This process is also known as facilitated diffusion. The example is sodium phosphate ion channel, sodium glucose ion channel, sodium bicarbonate ion channel. So the movement of sodium along the concentration gradient, whereas phosphate, glucose or bicarbonate against the concentration gradient. So sodium facilitate these ions to transport inside. So in this way the ATP is not required and sodium ion transportation sodium ion transportation helps these molecules for transportation from outside to inside. The second type is antiporters. Antiporters are those transmembrane proteins that allows one molecule from outside to inside and the another molecule from inside to outside. Like here we have an example that A molecule is transported to the inside, whereas during this transportation B molecule comes outside. Antiporters are further two types. These are ATP dependent or ATP independent. The example of ATP dependent is sodium potassium ATPase pump, and it is known as primary active transport, whereas sodium calcium ion channel is the example of ATP independent antiporters, and it is an example of secondary active transport. If we look at the transportation mechanism, ATP independent transportation, here we have an example that we have extracellular space and intracellular space, and here is the membrane, and these are the transmembrane proteins or integrated proteins. So first we observe that first we will look at the example of symporter. Like here we have sodium glucose ion channel. So sodium and glucose binds on the same side, and when this protein flips or conformational change occurs, these sodium and glucose ion come inside and they are released. So the sodium ion is, as we know that sodium ion is abundant in extracellular, so it comes to inside along the concentration gradient, and this energy, this potential or energy is helpful to for glucose to come inside against the concentration gradient. The other example is antiport of sodium calcium transportation. So in this case, sodium binds from outside and calcium binds from inside of the transmembrane protein. When flipping occurs or transformational change occur, the sodium ion comes inside, whereas calcium ion comes outside against the concentration gradient, whereas sodium ion comes inside along the concentration gradient. Here again we have represented the flipping mechanism or conformational change. So from here it is its its active site or pockets are outside, towards outside or extracellular space, and after flipping or conformational change these pockets come inside and sodium and glucose is released. Similarly here the sodium pocket is outside and calcium pocket is inside. When flipping occurs, then glucose pockets come outside and sodium comes inside. In this way, conformational change occur and rotation of the protein to at 180 degree helps these ions to transport inside or outside. Here we have an example of sodium potassium ATPase. It is also known as sodium potassium pump. It is ATP dependent transport, so it is primary active transport and it requires ATP in ATP molecule. So for each ATP molecule converted into ADP, the energy is enough to transport 3 sodium outside and 2 potassium inside. So these sodium ions and potassium ions move against the concentration gradient. So both sodium ion moves against the concentration gradient, similarly to potassium ion moves against the concentration gradient. So it is an example of antipode, but it is ATP dependent. So ATP molecule is required which provides energy to this protein, and this protein transports 3 sodium ion outside and 2 potassium ion inside of the cell. So the last topic of this lecture is membrane potential. So what is the membrane potential? It is the difference in electric potential due to ions between interior and exterior of the cell membrane. So this difference in electric potential causes resting membrane potential and active membrane potential. So what is the resting membrane potential? It is, in this case, positive ions are more outside, whereas negative ions are more or greater inside of the cell membrane. And in this case, resting membrane potential, this potential is developed because of sodium potassium ATPase and some other ATP dependent transportations. Active membrane potential. During active membrane potential, positive ions come inside, and passive transportation of sodium ion or calcium ion is responsible for active membrane potential, and this phenomena is also known as depolarization of the membrane. So nerve impulses transmitted through this phenomena. If you look at the different transport channels and membrane potential, we know that the sodium ions are more outside and potassium ions are more inside. So in resting membrane potential, in extracellular fluid, the membrane is more positive to the outside and negative towards inside. In case of in case of active membrane potential, depolarization of membrane occurs and sodium ions and calcium ions come inside, and in this way potassium ion decreases from outside, and this causes active membrane potential, and it is due to the facilitative diffusion of sodium ion or calcium ion through sodium ion channel or calcium ion channel, which is passive transport. Similarly, if potassium ion channel causes facilitated diffusion or sodium potassium ATPase, due to which three sodium ions comes outside and two potassium ion inside, it causes repolarization of the membrane, and in this way resting membrane potential is again developed. And chloride ion when comes inside, so it causes hyperpolarization of the membrane or repolarization of the membrane. So in this way the membrane potential works due to these ion channels. So ion channels are also important in membrane potential and the transmission of the nerve impulses. And the last one is the aquaporins. Aquaporins are the ion channels or transmembrane proteins that are involved in the transportation of water molecules across the cell membrane. So today we studied all kind of electrolytes transportation or balance. So in the next video of biochemistry, we will study acid-base balance. So thanks.